In our last segment on the CAGED system, we're going to look at some real-world examples to try to get you playing these 5 patterns in an improvisational setting and see why they're so useful in a real-world scenario. So we're going to look at a major key and see how the pentatonic scales can be used to navigate the movement from one chord to the next within that key. Let's just choose a simple example here. Let's try on the key of A. I'm going to use the 3 major chords in A. Some of these things you're going to have to take my word for if you're not quite clear on how the chord theory works. I don't quite have my theory reference library complete enough to be able to send you over to the segment that will be there eventually on how to use diatonic triads and why the 3 chords in the major key are what they are. But take my word for it right now. If you are in the key of A, the 3 major chords are A major, D major, and E major. So we'll do a little example here on how I'm going to decide where I'm going to play those. And then if I were improvising over the top of this and playing some lead guitar, I'd be looking for places that I can plug in the pentatonic scales over the top of that. A lot of this is going to become more clear when we get into our series in the future about how to improvise on guitar. But for now, I thought this would be a worthwhile way to conclude this CAGED system series by just showing you how useful these things can be. I'm going to just pick this area of the neck because it's going to be pretty simple here to play in the key of A. And the first thing I need to do in order to place the scale shapes, as we know from the earlier parts of the series, is find the chord shapes that are going to act as my markers for where those scale shapes are eventually going to go. So for the A chord, I have an A root right here on the 6th string, 5th fret, and then I'm going to need D and E. So I have a D root right here next to it. That's the 5th fret of the 5th string, and then 2 frets above that on the 7th fret of the 5th string is an E. To play chords here, in a real-world scenario, I would probably do my E form chord here for A, and I'd be playing an A form chord on the D. Now, 98% of guitar players are going to do this when they go from D to E. They're just going to slide it up, and there's nothing wrong with that. However, for the purposes of this example, that would have taken me out of position because you could see now I've stretched from being in the area of frets 4, 5, 6, 7 to being frets 7, 8, 9, and I don't want that here. So I'm going to not just do the easy movement of sliding the A form chord up 2 frets. Instead, I'm going to use a different shape to play the E chord. So if I want to stay back in this area while I'm playing my E chord, that means I got to put my 4th finger on the E root, and that's going to suggest that I play a C form chord here. So to recap that, I'm playing an A chord, a D chord, and an E chord. And you can see that I've used the E form chord to play A, I've used the A form chord to play D, and I've used the C form chord to play E. That keeps me very firmly rooted in this 4th position that revolves mainly around the E form scale that would go along with this E form chord. Now that E form scale for the key of A major is this. So what I'm going to do as I'm playing over the top of a chord progression is play stuff from the key of A, right? Well, that is not quite as careful and selective as we would probably like to be for the other chords. It's going to work great on the A chord for the most part, but when I go to the D chord, when I go to the E chord, you're going to see varying examples of this problem that happens all over the place, where if you don't know what half-step combination you really want on a given chord, it's possible to land on a rather dissonant note if you land on the side of the half-step in the key that you're not playing in a given chord. Here's what I mean by that. If we're talking about an A chord, it's got 3 notes in it. Those notes are the root, the 3rd, and the 5th of the key of A. That's A, C sharp, and E. In the key of A, there are some notes that will conflict quite a bit with one of those three notes that I just mentioned, A, C sharp, or E. In fact, if you were to play the fourth note of the scale, which happens to be a D, while this A chord was going on, you would find that that is a rather dissonant sound. And it's not that you can't use that, it's that you really need to know how you're going to use it and make sure that you have a tactic for how you're going to resolve it. Because if you land on it accidentally, it can be tricky to make that sound intentional or musical. So with no dissonance, you're severely limiting the interest in the musicality of what you're playing. However, just throwing dissonance all over the place without a lot of intention or deliberate approach can make it sound like you're just wandering back and forth all over the place. So if you've ever tried to get the 7-note scale to work over a single chord, you know what this sounds like. It sounds like sometimes I land on a note that I didn't quite mean to land on, and it's not that it's necessarily wrong, it's just maybe a little bit misguided. Well, pentatonics are the easy way around that. Pentatonics remove the possibility of you landing on that dissonant note. The downside of this is that it's also removing some of the more interesting dissonances that can make something a little bit more listenable or a little bit less bland. But I think that it's a good approach to start by playing notes that are very inside, that don't have a lot of dissonance, and that you can make sure that you don't really land on things that are going to make you go, ouch. Now, here's the tricky part. This changes every time you go to a different chord. So in the key of A, on these three chords that I talked about, the A chord, the D chord, and the E chord, the place where that dissonant note is, well, two dissonant notes really, is going to occur, changes on each one of these chords. And it's kind of a lot to think about to maintain that awareness of where those notes are going to be. But this is where pentatonic scales really bail you out. Now, yes, they do remove the possibility of some of the interesting things that can happen with dissonance. However, they keep you from sounding like you're playing wrong notes because they take the half steps out. So here's a fascinating thing. At least I think it's fascinating. In the key of A, if I play A major pentatonic over the A chords, and then when the D chord comes, I play D major pentatonic, and then when the E chord comes, I play E major pentatonic. Because of the notes that are left out of the pentatonic scales, none of those three pentatonics actually leaves the key of A. So I can change my mental context to a new pentatonic scale for each one of these chord sounds that comes along without actually leaving the key of A. And this is tremendously handy because now it's like that pentatonic scale pattern has pre-selected for you the notes that you're going to probably want to use over a given chord sound. The beautiful way to do this using the CAGED system is to stay within the overall framework of the major key that you're in, but use the other scale patterns to select those notes for you. Here's what that looks like. If I'm in the key of A and I want to select the A major pentatonic notes for an A chord, looks like this. That part's pretty obvious. So there I played the E major pentatonic form that corresponds to the A major scale. I took the two notes out that give me pentatonic. I would use this over an A chord and it would help me avoid the dissonant notes. Now if I go to my D chord and I change my thinking, now I'm going to be thinking about a D major pentatonic scale, but remember again, it has not left the key of A. Now I'm going to go to where I know my D shape is going to live. Now, in order to play D here, we moved over and we did this A form chord. On the 5th fret, it gave us a D sound. If I just plug in the A form pentatonic scale shape in the same spot over that same root, now I'm getting D major pentatonic here. Now if you compare those notes in D major pentatonic to where we started in the 7-note A major scale, you will see we haven't changed keys. We haven't gone to the key of D. We've left out all the notes that would have removed us from the key of A major and taken us into the key of D major. So that's why this is so handy to be able to use when I go from my A chord to my D chord. When I change my thinking about the pentatonic scale, all the hard work is done for me. Now I don't have the danger of hitting the dissonant notes that are going to maybe be a little bit off for the D chord, but I haven't changed keys. It's really a minimal amount of mental work to be able to do these things. So lastly, to go to the E chord, I used a C form shape here that kept me in position with the other two chords that I'm doing. And if I now use the corresponding pentatonic shape for this C form and start that from my note E, it'll give me E major pentatonic. And you'll see again, if I compare that to where I came from in the 7-note A major scale, I haven't left the key of A major. I didn't change keys and go to A because those notes that would have taken me out of the key are the ones that are left out of the pentatonic scale. All right, so now with this framework in mind, you can have a chord progression set up for yourself where you hear an accompaniment that uses the chords A, D, and E. As you change to the next chord, you change the associated pentatonic scale. I'm going to change A major pentatonic on the A chords, D major pentatonic on the D chords, E major pentatonic on the E chords. But I'm going to keep them all in this same spot by using this combination of caged forms, and it really makes this whole process relatively painless. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't have to practice it a lot, because let's talk about all of the various permutations of this idea that are going to come up. For starters, just within this same example of these 3 chords in A, I've only picked one position out of the 5 caged positions to do this example. If I were to move to another area of the neck, I would have to rethink all of these combinations. Let's just take a quick look at that. If I were to talk about, let's say, this A up here on the 12th fret of the 5th string, and decide that I'm going to play it with my 4th finger, that means that my A chord is now going to be played with the C form. And accordingly, my A major pentatonic is also going to be played with a C form. So if I want to stay in this position, which happens to be 9th position, and play my other scales, that means that I need to be playing my D chords and my D major pentatonic scales with the E form, and I need to be playing my E major chords and E major pentatonic scales with the G form. So now you can probably appreciate why it becomes so important to really get a grasp on the location process for all of these scale forms and chord forms. That's 2. There were 3 other places I could do this just in the key of A. And then, of course, there are 11 other keys. Now, the nice part is that once you understand the combination of how it works in a position, it'll work that way in the other keys. The position relationships are going to stick when you change to other keys. Now what you need to do is practice this a lot. And in my examples, when we do the How to Improvise series, I'm going to give you prompts. I'm going to tell you in the play-along example, this chord's coming. Play this associated scale pattern. The next chord's coming. And we'll try to do that here. I'm going to record an example track for you that uses the A, the D, and the E chord. And then I'm going to give you a prompt on the screen that says, hey, it's time to do this scale. It's time to do that scale. I'm only going to give you the one location. We're just going to do this in the example that I described in detail. And it'll be up to you then to move this to all the other places that you can do it for the key of A, and eventually to be able to do this in other keys with other chord progressions. We also didn't talk about minor scales. We're kind of saving all that stuff for the How to Improvise series. But I hope this gives you a reason to want to practice these forms and see how useful they can be, and begin to use them to get some improvisation under your belt and really feel like you've got the confidence to jump into a chord progression and say, I can play things that don't sound wrong. That doesn't mean that they're going to necessarily be brilliant licks. Also, we're talking about removing dissonance here. You might want that dissonance back in the future, in which case you're going to have to do more thinking about where do I begin to reincorporate some of these missing half steps. And there's countless other things that are going to have to be introduced in order for you to really get the feeling like, okay, I'm a competent improviser now. But hopefully you can appreciate a lot of that work that's in front of you, have motivation and an appetite for it. And join me again when we start our How to Improvise series, and we're going to talk about this process in detail, all the way from how do I know what key I'm in to how do I set up a comfortable hierarchy of note choices for myself and know what sounds I'm looking for. Am I looking for the sound of a chord tone or a tension or an arpeggio or passing tones or any of these various things that could be used in an improvisation, and actually have a very clear progressive set of lessons that walks you through all those things. So that's what we're aiming for. That'll do it for the CAGED system. I may add a supplemental lesson to this playlist at some other point, but I think we've talked about most of what we need to talk about here. If you've got any questions, make sure you put them in the comments. I'll try to answer it as best I can. And I thank you very much for joining me with this series. Don't forget to subscribe if you found this helpful, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.